All right, so you came up with a brilliant suggestion pretty much right on the spot at the end of our Ace Ventura video.
Mm-hmm.
Like it happened in real time at the end of that video. We were trying to figure out what to do next, and you brought up, was it Man with Two Brains you brought up first?
I think so.
And then it was like, oh, we never addressed the death of Carl Reiner. Why not just do The Jerk? Because for some reason, it had escaped my mind briefly that Carl Reiner directed both movies.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how that went out of my head, but because of Dad, we pretty much grew up on these movies. I remember the first time I saw both of these movies. Do you?
Nah.
I remember with The Jerk, it was one of the many occasions where I was at Hollywood Video,
Mm-hmm.
renting whatever. And there was a VHS of The Jerk there, and Dad said, "Oh, you've got to see this." And I had no idea what it was. And we watched it that night, and that's pretty much how I remember this movie. Like, even though I've seen the movie multiple times since, whenever the movie comes up, I immediately think of the first time I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think The Man with Two Brains, he had that DVD we watched a few times.
Yeah.
I think it was on a movie channel randomly. And he stopped on it and said, "You got to watch this." That was basically our gateway to early Steve Martin.
Yeah.
And then once he got that DVD, we revisited it a few more times.
Did Carl Reiner and Steve Martin ever do any other movies together?
Between these, they did Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And then
See, I always thought that was Mel Brooks.
yeah, it kind of feels like Brooks, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then the year after Man with Two Brains, they did All of Me. I think that was their last one.
Mm. I would love to have seen, I liked the movie as it was, but I would have loved to seen Carl Reiner in the director's chair for Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
I see what you mean,
Mm-hmm.
but thanks to What About Bob and Bowfinger and a number of others, I will never discredit Frank Oz in the director's chair of a comedy. So, and this was a case where Martin is also a co-writer on these.
Mm.
Like he Reiner and another person wrote The Man with Two Brains, and he wrote The Jerk with Carl Gottlieb, who plays Iron Balls McGinty in the movie. And it's I was gonna kind of work into this, but I feel like there's something we just got to throw out there right away about The Jerk.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked a lot about how there's the possibility that Terrence Malick's favorite movie is Zoolander, according to urban legend.
Yeah.
Are you aware of who was a massive fan of The Jerk to the point that he famously would quote it on his sets all the time?
Who?
Kubrick.
I was hoping that's who you would say, especially since I watched Dr. Sleep tonight.
Yeah. Yeah, not only was he a huge fan, and I heard a story where he invited Steve Martin like to his house to play chess or something.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like a massive fan.
Oh man, could you imagine like if how history would have changed if Kubrick was so inspired by The Jerk he had Steve Martin play Jack Torrance?
That would have been wild.
But I do have to say I love me some deranged Steve Martin.
he can play unhinged so well. It's like I was just telling you before we turned the camera on. I still swear to this day I would have given him an Oscar for Little Shop of Horrors, and I am not even joking. And I will say that till my dying day, probably.
Steve Martin's one of those guys that I forget about if he's not right in front of me, but then when I turn on something that he's in, I remember why he's so great.
Yeah, because it's the interesting thing about this is we talk about how it's like comedy at its most deranged.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, and we say how, oh my God, that's so weird about Kubrick, of all people, would quote The Jerk and all that. But it's like, don't forget he's the guy that made Doctor Strangelove.
Yeah.
When you make that connection, it's like the guy that made Doctor Strangelove loves The Jerk. Now it makes total sense.
Yeah. For Malick, there's nothing. But
and that's the thing too. I talked about this at great length a couple of times last year because I was talking about The Hustle. Since you just brought up Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
mm-hmm.
And when I was talking about the idea of them remaking Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, not to discredit the fact that it's also a remake in itself, but the point being, what I said a lot in those videos was there are comedians that are often imitated, and there are comedians that are known to be greats that are really just secretly imitating somebody else, or not so secretly imitating somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Even the most skilled comedian, nobody can imitate Steve Martin.
I think it's his delivery.
Yet you just cannot match. And it's the thing is, like, when you try to do Steve Martin, it's so obvious what you're doing, and it just does not have the impact.
Mm-hmm.
And this even goes beyond comedy. This also, I mean, it's comedic role also, but the thing is the dentist character in Little Shop of Horrors was always his own character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there's all kinds of independent productions of Little Shop of Horrors everywhere. And ever since the movie, whenever you look at independent productions of Little Shop of Horrors, like on YouTube or anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
almost everybody playing the dentist is just doing Steve Martin's version.
Mm-hmm.
Because he reaches a peak and you cannot really go any farther. It becomes impossible to take it anywhere else, but it always becomes, oh, they're just attempting to do Steve Martin, but it's obvious, but also not there.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just can't get there. It is something that only he can pull off.
And there's a lot of times where there's the movie that he's in may not be great, but his delivery and the way he approaches things saves it. An example that comes to mind is Bringing Down the House. Bringing Down the House is an okay movie. I always come back to it because of Steve Martin.
Yeah, I haven't watched it in a long ass time. I think because I'm afraid to.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll take your word for it for now. So there is, and we were talking about the fact that you can't imitate Steve Martin because Steve Martin just has that particular style that only suits him.
And the thing is, too, is if you look at his filmography, the dude's got range.
Yeah, because you look at it and you would think Pennies from Heaven would have been something he tried after he'd been in comedy for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
It was his next movie after The Jerk.
Because I mean, you look at it like the way he does it, like there's just a lot of range there. I mean, he can go from, being, how he is in these two movies where he's over the top and odd and deranged, and you can look at that side of him. You can also look at a movie like It's Complicated where he's the quiet, reserved guy.
But can also be very funny.
Yeah, the scene where he gets high is fantastic.
And you talk about his range. There's a lot of stuff that he's written where he really kind of went in that dramatic territory, like A Simple Twist of Fate, and a movie that I loved was Shopper.
Yeah,
which I think is also based on a book that he wrote.
Probably.
But there is nothing like his comedy. It is its own thing that has not been successfully imitated by anybody.
I keep thinking there needs to be a way where we talk about the Three Amigos.
Yeah, I was telling you, weirdly enough, the closest thing to it story-wise is Tropic Thunder.
Yeah, but I don't know if I want to tackle Tropic Thunder in 2020.
Yeah. It's the same reason we avoided Team America.
Yeah.
But yeah, and when I say you cannot imitate Steve Martin's comedy, it is its own sort of monster. Is there a better representation of that than The Jerk?
I don't think so.
The Jerk is basically a comedy Rorschach test to audiences. So should we talk about it first and then go into The Man with Two Brains?
I love it. This was a Carl Reiner tribute, but we spent all of it talking about Steve Martin.
I noticed that. I figured we'll get more into the whole thing we're talking about with the style here is while we are talking about, Martin's style and his writing, it is under Reiner's, direction. So that's going to speak volumes in itself.
Yeah.
And it's like we were talking about how you said, what would it be like if Carl Reiner had done Dirty Rotten Scoundrels? And I said, well, Frank Oz is obviously his own comedic monster as far as directing goes.
Mm-hmm.
But that does show you, like, that it probably would have been a different movie with
Mm-hmm.
Reiner. Because with Reiner directing Martin, it was a case where it seems like they just kind of went for it wherever they saw it. Like, I was reading, I think it was, I can't remember if it was The Jerk or The Man with Two Brains, but one of them, they would carpool together to the set every day.
Mm-hmm.
And they would basically, even though there was a script and they knew the scenes they were going to be doing that day, they would come up with new lines and new jokes on their way to the set to do everything.
I would love to be a fly on the wall on that car ride.
Yeah, there's so many things here because Ebert didn't like either of these movies,
Mm-hmm.
and Ebert was like, the best critic ever in my eyes, so I refer to his work a lot. And he made a good point, but it's also very easy to argue this point about why he didn't like The Jerk specifically.
Mm-hmm.
Where it was, to paraphrase, it was basically, there's the thing of the joke itself just being like a sight gag that's intended to be funny versus the logic behind what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Like his example was why he's wearing the goggles when he leaves the house.
Mm-hmm.
And Ebert's argument was, it's not funny that he's wearing the goggles. What would be funny is if we got an explanation as to why he was wearing the goggles, and the explanation would be what was funny about it. But that's the kind of the argument that you can make is, it's not necessarily us laughing at the fact that he's wearing goggles. It's the fact that, exactly what Ebert said, there's no reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the comedic beat comes from.
Well, and in that case, I mean, any way that you would try to explain it would end up being a letdown. Like, it's one of those cases where less is more.
Yeah, and I think his argument was, if there was like a really clever and funny explanation, and that's what he was hoping for out of the style.
Mm-hmm.
But
I think I feel like that's one of those things that they kind of go around and around with, and finally a writer or Carl Reiner or probably even Steve Martin was like, maybe it's just funnier if we don't address it.
Yeah, because I do get his argument of just doing something random by itself.
Mm-hmm.
It could very easily not be funny. A lot of people try to get by with that style of comedy, especially today, and for the most part, it doesn't work. But there's a method to the madness with Reiner and Martin working here.
When you say scenes that go without explanation like that, and you said how sometimes it works, do you know what comes to mind for me? It's kind of a different interpretation of it. It's kind of the same thing. The mustache in UHF.
Yeah, that bit was going to mind a couple of times the last time I watched The Jerk. Yeah, because it's another case, much like a movie like UHF. The comedy is so just sort of balls to the wall in itself without logic and without explanation. A lot of the comedy also comes from the anticipation, because if you're watching it for the first time, you have no idea what's around the next corner.
When the first time you watch The Jerk, you almost need a roadmap. Like it just goes in so many different directions.
Yeah, and like the glasses thing is like the only cohesive plot line.
Yeah, and I would chalk that up to barely.
And he basically goes through like a Forrest Gump series of events.
Mm-hmm.
To where it's like
that's a really interesting way to put The Jerk.
Yeah, he just keeps falling into things where he just like the whole thing right before Emmett Walsh is introduced, where he's like, things are going to start happening to me now. And that's literally what it is from then on. Just things happen to him. Oh, Emmett Walsh playing a very comedic version of his character in Blood Simple 5 years before Blood Simple. I really want the Coen brothers to have seen The Jerk and say, we need to make that character scary. And knowing the Coen brothers, that could be exactly what happened.
And all the while they did it, Ethan's cracking up and Joel has a completely straight face. No, I think part of what helps the jerk work is for, like, in The Man with Two Brains, it's Steve Martin is causing the events that happen. In The Jerk, it's all him reacting to what's going on around him.
Yeah. And the way he reacts to everything also is so, like, you can tell it was really like a star making turn, because it was, like I said, it's basically Steve Martin's whole comedic thing brought to life through a movie character. Like, there are lines that Nathan has that feel exactly like moments that he would just say on a talk show, just random. Like, he would be on those old talk shows like Carson back in the day and just whip out one-liners. Because he could just do that. Like the line when they say, do you want to come and listen to some blues music? And he says, something about those songs, they depress me, is exactly the kind of thing he would have just whipped out on a talk show. It is to my understanding that I Was Born a Poor Black Child is how he used to start his old stand-up routines before this movie even happened.
I wonder if he could get away with that now.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and it's like, obviously it's hard to speak from a certain perspective, because who are we to say who gets upset by what? But if I had to put my own opinion on that, it's like the fact that it's so out there and inappropriate and stereotypical, it is the joke.
Yeah.
Like, it starts off with the joke that he's white, they're black, and he doesn't notice. And that joke is amplified by the stereotypes.
Yeah.
Like, the more stereotypical it is, the more absurd it is that he doesn't notice. That's the best way I can word that. Would you say there's also, and this is also something, it predates it by a year, there's something very Airplane about a lot of the jokes as well.
Yeah, I could see that.
Like, the one that really occurs to me is the shit and Shinola scene, where it's like it takes an expression and just brings it to literal life, and it's just its own little joke with no other context. And it's like, and I kind of love the extra little moment they put in there when he identifies the Shinola and the giant pile of shit on the ground, and then they just keep walking and talking, and he just walks right through the shit and never notices. Because there is, I do like you talk about the over the top nature of it and the Airplane nature of it. I do think The Man with Two Brains takes that to a higher level. But this one starts this one. It's like also the moment that feels very Airplane. And remember, to the movie's credit, pre-Airplane. The moment when they're singing the duet, and just very cartoonishly, Bernadette Pierce makes a trumpet appear and just starts playing. It's so cartoonish how things can just be pulled out of nowhere.
I think too, with the over the topness that happens in The Man with Two Brains, I think what helps it is The Man with Two Brains, to me, kind of feels like, and this may be a little redundant, The Man with Two Brains reminds me of Young Frankenstein in the setting of a 50s B horror movie.
Yeah, I was actually going to bring that up when we talked about it. Man with Two Brains is like more of a parody, like a specific parody.
Yeah.
And The Jerk is just kind of its own.
It's its own animal.
Yeah, and there's also, and I love the way that The Jerk is able to open it up, because like I've talked about this a lot with bad comedies. A lot of bad comedies have a tendency to just let their bits go on and on and on because they have no control. And they think the longer it goes, the funnier it'll be. And it's like, there's a specific way to pull that off, and a lot of comedies can't do it. But when you know what you've got and you've got somebody that knows exactly what they're doing, you can do stuff like when they're at the gas station and Jackie Mason's going to give him a place to stay, going to give him a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And he walks into the bathroom and he's like, "Oh, this is great." And he goes through his whole redesign of the bathroom. He gets through the whole redesign before Jackie Mason stops him and says, "No, it's in here." And it's like, it could have been a funny joke to just have him say, "Wow, this is great." And then he's just told, "No, it's in here." But then he went through the whole thing.
And I think part of the comedy about it too is that Jackie Mason lets him go through the whole thing.
Yeah. And they bring a joke back where the guy that's there at the urinal has the really obnoxious key with him. Like, there's so many jokes in that one moment.
That's also like you were talking about Emmett Walsh earlier. Whenever he shoots the oil can and he's like, "Oh, it's leaking," and they keep shooting him, he's just like, "This one's leaking too."
That's got to be one of like the most classic scenes of the movie, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I would say so.
Like, the whole lead in, like starting up with the new phone books are here.
Yeah.
And then the immediate introduction of Emmett Walsh. And I love Walsh's dialogue as he's shooting it. He's like, "Yeah, I'm gonna get you, you random son of a." Because that's his whole character. He just chose a dude at random, and then that's his motivation. That's a hilarious joke. Like, the fact that there is no purpose for how the events keep going in this movie, and then the way so I'm choking on my spit laughing at this. The way the guy with the glasses stands in front of him, and Walsh's response is, "Oh, average, typical, blocking the view of the." He gives the guy blocking his view a whole name also.
But since his purpose is to take out Steve Martin, he doesn't take him out.
Yeah, he's so insane, but he's clearly got the principle of, "I came here with one mission, and that's the only thing I'm gonna do. That's the only bloodshed that will be here." And the fact that we have there's so much in regards to escalation. Like, the whole movie is escalation.
Mm-hmm.
Like, whether it be them wanting to rob him, to him pulling off the entire side of the church when they drive away. And then this whole thing with Emmett Walsh where he's like, "Oh, he's just mad at these cans," but he keeps hiding behind other cans. And it's like, this is where you get that idea where it's dumb comedy,
Mm-hmm.
but it takes very smart comedians to make dumb comedy actually funny.
Yeah.
And like, that's where and that's the thing where it's like, is there even merit to the term dumb comedy? Like, when we're talking about the absurdity of all this, is it just smart at its core? And then there's there's just some lines, like, they're barely anything. Like when Emmett Walsh finds him again,
Mm-hmm.
and he's writing. It's those moments where he writes his notes back to his family. And there's the moment like, "I'm gonna start making more money now because my girlfriend offered me a blowjob," and assuming that's another term of employment. But then there's that moment where he looks out the window and realizes Emmett Walsh is back, and the letter ends with, "I have to go now as someone is staring at me through binoculars." And if I remember correctly, we get that line before we get the cut to Emmett Walsh actually watching him through binoculars.
I believe so.
And that's what's so brilliant about it, is the fact that there hardly is transitions.
Mm-hmm.
They're so minuscule. Do you have a particular favorite bit?
I do like the cans.
I think the Emma Walsh bit's probably my favorite of the movie.
I also, because we're talking about it being a Carl Reiner film, I love the reveal of Carl Reiner's eyes.
I love that whole joke because of how fucking meta it is. That Carl Reiner is the downfall of his own character. The whole buildup of because my eyes look like this, I couldn't call cut fast enough. Observe, and the car crashes and bursts into flames, and all the actors die. Cut.
Is that one of the earliest examples of meta humor?
Oh man, it would have to be up there because one of the earliest examples I can think of, when I usually do it right away, is Return to Killer Tomatoes, but that's like late '80s. That was like a decade after. Well, no. Bob Hope Bing Crosby had that down.
Oh, okay.
That might have been kind of the big start of it.
Mm-hmm.
That goes back to like the 40s and 50s.
Mm.
But this was a great because in the movie it's so unexpected because it's at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's the main cause of conflict that brings us full circle.
Yeah.
And then there is also just random moments. It's the random moments involving like murder and or death that just come from out of, because for the most part the comedy is, I think because Naven is such an innocent character at heart before he becomes the jerk that he becomes, is what kind of, like when stuff like that comes from out of nowhere, like suddenly a guy wants to kill him at random, or the Carl Reiner thing. There's the moment when his butler's wife. There's that whole joke about the banks. And they're like, yeah, she got into her savings account and she wanted an early withdrawal. And this is what happened. And she dies by firing squad in the backyard with the butler watching on, depressed. And then they just go about the rest of their business. That's Maurice Evans as the butler, by the way. Dr. Zayas from Planet of the Apes. So...
I also love how we get this whole narration for him. Like he's narrating the whole story for us. And we get to the end of his narration and he's sitting there and there's no big arc of him going back. His family just comes and picks him up.
Yeah. and you think Bernadette Peters might be gone forever, and it's like, oh no, I brought them, and they're just all together. And that's I love some of the best comedies ever managed to reach that status by not giving a fuck about their conflicts.
Yeah.
Like in some cases that can be seen as lazy writing, but if a comedy does it just right, it can be one of the funniest things about a comedy. It's just them saying fuck you to the whole conflict cliche.
Yeah, it's one of those cases where they're like, the story doesn't really matter, we're here to tell jokes.
Yeah, it's literally, like, it's basically a series of sketches that just happens to have the same main character. That's about it.
Yeah.
Oh, and of course, they went and they made a made-for-TV sequel, which I didn't see.
I didn't even know that existed.
Naven is played by somebody I have never heard of. And it's got like a 2 on IMDb.
Oh, man.
So I think Martin might have produced it. I don't know for sure, but yeah.
I will check. What's it called?
The Jerk 2, and 2 is TOO. I just cringe saying that. And we never mentioned this, but was that not Rob Reiner that drives him to the end of the fence at the beginning?
I believe it is.
Yeah. So just with the whole style we were talking about, I do remember reading that they were saying that like Reiner and Martin and the other writers all wanted like they basically wanted the script to have at least one laugh on every single page.
Hmm.
So that's where you can kind of get the sort of constant like gags going on. But when you do something like that, you kind of risk like not everything's gonna stick, and not everything does stick.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd say more than enough does.
Yeah. Steve Martin was an executive producer on The Jerk 2, TOO.
So it's likely he didn't do anything on it.
He was probably like, sure, go ahead.
And he had to get a characters based on credit.
Yeah, he has that too. But
So,
yeah, I mean, watching The Jerk now, it's still funny. There's still stuff that works.
it's the kind of thing where it seems like it'd be in danger of being dated, and I don't know that I could argue with anybody that would say it's dated, but I said Martin's comedy is just immortal. I think it's even when you see him now, especially when he does his team ups with Martin Short, it's all there.
I think also, and there could be something I'm forgetting, but movies like this stay funny because there's not just random pop culture references sprinkled throughout.
Yeah.
The Man with Two Brains has one, but it's a reveal and it's funny.
and there's foreshadowing to it, which helps a lot too.
Yes.
I love it. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, technically that is a pop culture reference.
Technically, it's borderline. It's borderline. But there are people today that would not understand that joke.
Yeah. So, is this our transition onto The Man with Two Brains?
I think so.
So, like we were saying, and you were indicating, this one is much more of like a straight parody of a certain type of movie.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going after stuff like you can see it because obviously we know that Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner were like best friends forever.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't seem too unlikely that he took influence from Young Frankenstein. Certainly.
Yeah.
Like, well, you could probably argue, does the movie hurt it? Because you could compare it too much to Young Frankenstein, because Young Frankenstein is such a masterpiece.
But whereas Young Frankenstein is a straight up parody, Man with Two Brains is more of a genre parody.
Yeah. Because you got so much thrown in, like that movie Donovan's Brain that they're watching at the beginning.
Yeah.
It is a real movie.
Oh, is it?
And then there's The Brain That Wouldn't Die is the movie this is probably most compared to, which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, just pretty much anything with B movie elements is pretty much thrown into this. It's like kind of a whole mixture.
And the way that it's filmed, it definitely feels that way. Like the way he looks when he's doing his surgeries, and I love the different costumes that people were wearing in the observation room. Like there's a cowboy and like.
Fun fact about the style. You know how how Mel Brooks directed Young Frankenstein to where it basically looks like James Whale directed it.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know who Steve Martin wanted to direct The Man with Two Brains?
No, who?
I'm trying to imagine what exactly he would have wanted, because this person said number one, they were already doing another movie, a now very famous movie, but they also had no interest in doing a comedy.
Okay.
So my question is, I'm assuming, much like Brooks directed Young Frankenstein, pretty much it basically looks like Whale directed it. You just the things that are going on are comedic.
Yeah.
I wonder if Martin wanted this person to direct the movie straight, as they would any other movie, just with all the comedic shit going on.
Okay.
He asked Cronenberg. And it's like, I see what he was going. I feel like he wanted Cronenberg to direct this movie as a Cronenberg movie. It just has the comedic gags in it.
Yeah. I wasn't sure where you were going to go with that. I was thinking in my head, I was like John Landis, Harold Ramis. I didn't know where you were going with that.
Because my understanding of the story was he was busy with Video Jerome.
Uh-huh.
But even though he said, I'm busy with Video Jerome, he added on, plus, I just don't do comedy. And it's really funny to think that Cronenberg had a reputation and they went to him because of it. The scene at the beginning when they're shaving Kathleen Turner.
Yeah.
One of those guys is Jeffrey Combs from Reanimator.
Oh.
He was also the craziest fuck dude in The Frighteners.
Yeah.
And he's I had a friend that met him at a convention once, and apparently he is legitimately insane.
Really?
But like in an appealing way.
Okay.
And the great thing about that is you can compare this movie to Reanimator. You can see like stuff in it that makes you think of Reanimator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Man with Two Brains is pre-Reanimator. Jeffrey Combs appeared in this movie, then did Reanimator. It's almost like him doing a movie as straightforward crazy as Reanimator is a reference to him being in this rather than the other way around.
It could be.
And it's interesting how much this movie does seem to have influenced. There's also the moment in Orgasmo when Trey Parker says, he prays and he says, if you don't want me to do porn, give me a sign, and an earthquake happens.
Yeah.
Direct joke from this movie.
Yeah.
You could say, and nothing against Trey Parker at all, but you can say that joke is an homage to this movie. They just straight up took the joke.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot fun. Weirdly enough, you would think a person like Trey Parker in a movie like Orgasmo taking a joke from The Man with Two Brains, it would be more played up.
Mm-hmm.
It's more over the top in The Man with Two Brains.
Yeah.
Like it goes for a long time. And I think the longer it goes on, the funnier the punchline is of him just saying, just any sign at all.
And the fact that while it's all going on, he just has no reaction to any of it.
And once again, just like The Jerk, there's moments that are like absolute Steve Martin moments. There's one joke that's like a couple of layers of it. It's the delivery, and you're laughing so much at what he said and the delivery of it. It takes another second for you to realize another reason the line is funny.
Okay.
It's when he's talking about his dead wife, and he pulls out the doll that looks like her, and he sets it on the dashboard. And they're like, "Is that her?" No, it's just a statue of her. It's like, number one, the fact that he thinks the person thought that was his actual wife is funny.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that it's also a doll that for some reason he's calling a statue.
And its head bobbles.
And once again, just like The Jerk, it also it does have, like a plot going on and certain like story developments going on through the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
It also has its own just random jokes throughout. Like Carl Reiner said that probably his favorite joke he ever did in any movie was the joke with the little girl repeating back all the instructions to him.
That's hilarious.
The thing that makes that especially great is apparently the girl was not reading off of a cue card.
Uh-huh.
The girl memorized all of that for that scene.
Uh-huh.
And the shot in the movie is the first take.
Wow.
Like that makes that scene even more amazing to know that.
I know. What's funny about it is that's another one that's kind of layered. Because when he's first saying all this stuff, it's like, he's saying that to a little kid. She'll never remember. Layer number 2, she remembered every word. And recited it back. And then layer 3, she diagnosed it.
To his chagrin.
Yeah. And then calls her an idiot for getting it wrong.
And it's one of those things where it's funny in the moment, and then it's funny to watch back, because when you watch it the first time, if you don't know the punchline, you think she's just staring blankly while he's just saying all this. And then it's funnier when you know, because that's a look of registering everything.
Yeah, she's taking it all in. And I love how that scene, too, also kind of tells you what kind of over-the-top movie we're in, just by the way Kathleen Turner's body flies when he hits her.
Like, it would be so out of place otherwise, but then as the movie goes on, it's all bets are off eventually.
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out how to word this, because this is something very peculiar about this movie in itself.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the story goes, the movie is relatively slow moving.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it builds up. Like, it builds up the type of character Kathleen Turner is with her first husband.
Mm-hmm.
Then it builds up their relationship and how their dynamic, and the fact that it's sexless, and how he eventually grows to hate her.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's the whole stuff with his profession. Then he meets David Warner. Then David Warner takes him to his house.
Mm-hmm.
That's a large fraction of the movie. That's at least a third of the movie, if not more, before we even get to where it's going. And with a movie with as many over-the-top gags as this has constantly, story-wise, it feels weird to call it a slow burn, but is that what it is?
Well, don't forget also that, yeah, he goes to David Warner's house, but David Warner teases what's happening with the brains.
Yeah. There's something.
David Warner's great in this movie.
Yeah, I need to get your opinion on a joke.
Okay.
Because there's a joke that I love.
Mm-hmm.
I absolutely love. But I feel like they botched it a little bit in execution.
Okay.
How amazing is the joke that David Warner's house looks normal on the outside, and then it's a creepy castle on the inside? Do you think that joke would have been significantly funnier with no attention drawn to it? They explain that joke in so many ways that he goes through the whole thing of, oh, your house is normal. I thought it would have been like creepy and castle-like. And he's like, oh, you mean like this? And Martin's like, oh, wow, it looks so much smaller on the outside. And it's like, if they just gone to his house without saying anything, and Warner opened the door and that's what the inside looked like, and they just went in, would that not have been funnier?
I think it works on both levels, even though earlier I just said less is more. That approach would be funny, but at the same time, I do love the fact that Steve Martin treats it like anybody else that's ever walked into someone's house and been like, oh, wow, this was bigger than I thought.
Yeah. Like, he's not too over the top in his reaction.
One of my favorite characters in the movie that I feel like is so understated, I love David Warner's butler.
Yeah, the guy from the Jeffersons.
Yes. He's
also the judge in the Addams Family.
His David Warner's butler, I can't get enough of him. He could have his own movie and I'd be fine with it.
How casually he treats the paper door and all.
I do love the paper thin walls joke. And I love that later it serves a purpose.
Yeah. the battering ram moment that's right out of like The Great Race or something.
Yeah. I love it. It feels very Mel Brooks that they borrow it from the next door neighbor.
Yeah.
Like, I see a lot of Mel Brooks influence in The Man with Two Brains.
Yeah.
I like, if you would have told me that was a Mel Brooks movie and not a Carl Reiner movie, I wouldn't have questioned it.
Like, especially being close friends, surely they had discussions.
Mm-hmm. Like
about.
that feels like a joke that Mel Brooks would be like, "Hey, wouldn't it be funny if the battering ram was at the next door neighbors?"
Yeah. And then I was talking about like my comparison was there is a moment in The Great Race that is one of my favorite comedy moments in any movie ever, probably, if I remember it correctly. The Great Race isn't a great movie, so I've only seen it like a couple of times.
I love how you say The Great Race isn't a great movie.
But if I'm remembering correctly, there is a moment when they're having a big giant sword fight that's like a inspiration from like Errol Flynn and Basil Rathbone and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And they're at the top of the castle, and then the villain gets away, and there's like a wooden boat at the bottom of the castle. That's going to be his getaway.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to jump down, and then he's going to go away, and that's going to be how the villain gets away.
Mm-hmm.
This is how the scene ends. It just dissolves into the next scene. The villain says, "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a boat to catch." And he jumps down and just goes through the boat, and the boat just shatters into pieces. And then it just goes into the next scene. It's like that moment, for some reason, reminds me of the battering ram moment.
Yeah.
Where they just go, it's one thing that they just go right through the wall, but then into a pool is like the ultimate, like, comedic, like, classic comedic moment.
There's a lot of stuff like that. Like, that's very parody feeling. Like, there's a couple things that come to mind. I love the test to determine if he's drunk.
Yeah, we get another, both in The Jerk and The Man with Two Brains, Steve Martin gets to show off that he can juggle.
Yeah. I'm surprised he didn't play a banjo.
Yeah. That would have been good for the drunk test also.
Yeah.
Like, give him a banjo and tell him to play a really complicated song or something.
Yeah. I also, I love the scene when he's been sexually frustrated and he goes to his boss.
When we had Dad's DVD, how many times did we rewind and watch that scene over again?
The run up the wall with the backflip is just...
What's really funny is we always laughed about him ripping off the doorknob and running up the wall.
Mm-hmm.
There's a joke that's gold, I believe, in that same scene that we just completely overlook. The fact that the guy's always standing like this.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, by the way, when are you going to have your hand surgically removed from your face? That's what's so great about this. There's so many big jokes in it. There's jokes like that we forget about, and they're as funny as they were the first time when you watch it again.
And I think it goes back to Steve Martin's delivery. Because it's by the way, it's very conversational. Like, he doesn't tell it like a joke. He just brings it up like a conversation.
It's also jokes like that for some reason remind me of the mustache joke in UHF.
Yeah.
That's the thing. That's the weird thing with The Great Race and the UHF references we've been making. It's like, it's interesting how these aren't the same gags, but there's something stylistically similar, that they're jokes that remind you of jokes in other movies. It's weird how that works. Yeah.
Let's talk about the very, very, very small sample of James Cromwell we get.
First off, what a random casting choice. I mean, I think this is before he was like really well known for like the roles he's known for now, which makes it weirder.
See, I'd forgotten he was in it. When I saw his name in the credits, I was like, oh, that must be a different James Cromwell. No.
Yeah, because when you look at this, and then just a year later, he was Anthony Edwards' dad in Revenge of the Nerds.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, when James Cromwell went into drama, was that him making a weird transition that was weird at the time? Because in his little role in Revenge of the Nerds, he goes all in.
Well, that's just like we were talking about a couple of videos ago. We talked about The Longest Yard, and he's the straightest character in the movie.
And then there was we were kind of just talking about the overall over the top nature of it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like I was trying because I was saying that the jerk was dumb comedy, but then I struggled to call it that because it's clearly made by smart comedic minds, which is what makes it funny.
Mm-hmm.
Like the dumb stuff would have to be smart in order for us to actually laugh at it legitimately without laughing, like laugh with them instead of at them and say like, "Oh my god, this is terrible."
Yeah.
But it's like I feel like without like you could say this movie is dumber,
Mm-hmm.
and a large portion of that also is the fact that the jerk has the leeway to be dumb because we're following Naven, who is a dumb person.
Mm-hmm. Kind
Whereas,
of how I guess you could equate it in that way to the original Dumb and Dumber.
yeah, yeah, which is another we often bring up where it's the interesting enough the bizarre thing and an otherwise serious actor's credits.
Mm-hmm. But that's why I was saying earlier, that's why I feel like The Man with Two Brains works, because we're in the setting of a 50s B movie where ridiculous things happen.
And it's like, and it keeps we keep coming back to airplane
Mm-hmm.
analogies, or I do. And this is probably more relatable because it's a parody like Airplane is.
Mm-hmm.
But also like Airplane, we get jokes that are big and kind of small and just sort of throwaway. And sometimes the throwaway stuff can get the loudest laughs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why, but just a really simple joke in this that gets me every time is when at the end, when David Warner's giving him the instructions and he's repeating them back and doing them on this side. And
Mm-hmm.
David Warner says something else, he repeats it. David Warner coughs, and then he coughs back. that that should not be as funny as it is, surrounded by all the other things it's surrounded by.
And this is also, there's also a couple of moments where it's not like laugh out loud, but it's like, that's funny. What I'm thinking is when Steve Martin gets the glass cleaner ready, the name of the brand is Pain in the Glass. Spelled like window paint. It's brilliant punning.
And it's done so quickly, no attention's drawn to it.
Yeah. I mean, it's the pun game is on point. No pun intended with the needle. And another thing, too, I think what also really makes this movie work is she's not part of the over-the-top comedy so much, but Kathleen Turner is perfectly cast.
Yeah.
She plays
like,
such a good bitch.
and it's interesting because she was right off Body Heat,
Mm-hmm.
where she was basically playing this exact same character type in a dead serious movie.
Mm-hmm.
But then she was able to put that spin on it where it really shows how you can play pretty much the exact same role, but if you do it just right, you can do it dramatically and comedically.
Yeah.
And then she even gets her moments where like it seemed to just come from out of nowhere. Like in the moment when he's finally confronting her, when he calls her scum queen and she throws her into the mud. And apparently that scene was so famous that like people called Kathleen Turner scum queen just as a reference to this movie for a long time after it.
That's funny.
But I don't know how she felt about that, but it became
I want there to be a world where she shows up to the set of Preetzi's Honor and Jack Nicholson just says, "Hey, it's the scum queen."
it was only 2 years later. That's very plausible. But the thing that really gets me about that scene is the way she talks back to him when he's finally standing up to her.
Mm-hmm.
Comes from out of nowhere, where it's like he hits her, there's a scuffle, and she's like, "My balls." Like, and then where did the slurs come from? she's dropping all these big slurs, none of which relate to him. And I get that's the joke. Is that they don't relate to him and they're from out of nowhere. But it's but yeah, and then how that like completely ties in. Like we were talking about how there's so many different elements to what they were doing with like B movies.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the whole idea of the elevator killer seems like a totally unrelated thing through the whole movie.
Yeah.
But at the same time also kind of fits in with those B movies. It feels like almost like a B slasher sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then the way it ties in to he needs a dead body.
I love it. The elevator killer even gets an epilogue.
And then you were talking about the reveal,
Mm-hmm.
which is probably, I would say, probably one of the more famous scenes of the movie, wouldn't you?
It'd have to be up there. It's one of the classic reveal scenes in comedy.
Yeah, because we were talking about how she's watching Merv Griffin at the beginning,
Mm-hmm.
which is foreshadowing. But it's great foreshadowing because you would never in a million years your first time watching it think that it's foreshadowing.
Yeah.
That
I mean, the way that it's going, I mean, the movie kind of sets you up to think it's David Warner.
Yeah. A character that has shown tendencies of possibly being crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just so, it just blindsides you.
And it leaves a whole other, because we never see this part go down. After you see the reveal, you're like, oh my God, I want to see Merv Griffin interact with David Warner's character. I want to know how these interactions go.
We also haven't mentioned that the brain itself is an uncredited Sissy Spacek.
I didn't know that.
I don't know why, because they sound nothing alike. I think I had just assumed that Kathleen Turner was also doing the brain.
Mm-hmm.
But no, it's Sissy Spacek.
Huh. Interesting.
And it would have been funny in retrospect by the end of that decade, because it's like, if Kathleen Turner had done the brain would just sound like Jessica Rabbit.
Yeah, this is true.
So it's a good thing they didn't go that route.
And I love the outlandish things that happen with the brain. Like, once he gets possession of the brain, we just go into full on what the fuck territory.
Yeah. And no idea. I don't know it's funny enough, the image of him being in the boat with it and having a romantic day with it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the follow-up makes it funnier. Were you on a boat kissing a brain today? No.
I also kind of, I don't know if this is meant to be a joke or not, or if it's just something that I found funny. When he shows back up at David Warner's laboratory and he admits that he stole the brain, and David Warner's like, it was you. Who the fuck else would it have been? The butler should know. Like, was the butler a suspect? Like,
well, remember, the butler's always a suspect.
Yeah, it's true. But it's just so outlandish.
What's really great is I don't know if I ever thought about just how funny that is until you brought it up.
I also love, I don't know what look he's going for, but I love David Warner's, like, fuck it all look for the end of the movie. Like, in his little rain hat and shit.
Yeah, what is that? So, I would say, I think The Jerk is probably more clever in how it's able to make what it does work in the way that it does.
Mm-hmm.
I do think this movie is dumber.
Mm-hmm. I would go so far as to say that The Jerk is a classic, but I would say The Man with Two Brains is probably a cult classic.
It could be. I'm not entirely sure what kind of. I know some, like I was talking about other references to it later. There's also, I'd say the movie's been out long enough. People have seen it to where we can just talk openly about this.
Mm-hmm.
When we learn what's going on with Us, Jordan Peele's movie.
Yeah.
About the doppelgangers.
Mm-hmm.
And how there's clues all over that movie as to what's going on.
Yeah.
the opening shot of Us is her watching TV,
Mhm.
and there's videotapes there
Mhm.
that foreshadow what's going on. Like Chud is there, and the Goonies is there, and both those represent the underground where the doppelgangers are.
Yeah.
And to represent the doppelganger aspect, The Man with Two Brains is a movie that's there.
Huh.
It's like Pete Peel was doing that to like hint at what was going on.
Now I want to see the family from Us sitting down and watching The Man with Two Brains together.
It could have been one of the last movies she watched before she.
Yeah.
We're way into Us spoiler territory now, so sorry if our Steve Martin fans didn't get to Us in time.
Yeah.
Oh, but what I was going to finish with was I think The Man with Two Brains is the movie I go back to. Like, it's the one that I think to rewatch first between the two.
I'm a sucker for good slapstick, and Man with Two Brains is chocked full of good slapstick.
Like I said, whenever we'd go to Dad's, it was like one of his DVD collection. That was one of our go-tos.
Mm-hmm. And there's so many physical gags in that movie. Like, we didn't even bring up the fact that the thing that inspires David Warner is that Steve Martin's doctor literally creates a method where he can unscrew the top of their head. And we didn't even bring up the fact that there's a pretty good running joke going through the movie too in regards to his name.
I was thinking of all the different ways the head screwing comes back into play, like when she's on the balcony, possibly going to jump off, and his explanation was, "No, I think literally your head's just not screwed on too tight enough." So, yeah, is that like? Some people get really bent out of shape when I don't outright choose a movie at the end of these.
Yeah.
But it's like, even though I feel like I make it clear that these are the aspects that make this one work more than the other, and these are the aspects that make that one work more. No, people absolutely want a chosen one. So what is your chosen one?
I think what also help. I think The Man with Two Brains and The Jerk are also very similar in the fact that The Man with Two Brains, I think, has a more cohesive plot, but it's still, hey, fuck the plot. We're here to tell jokes.
But it does have those ways of tying things together, where she there's enough of a series of events that she ends up in the elevator with Merv Griffin.
Yeah.
Just think, there is a comedy that results in death because of that sentence. There is enough of a series of events that she ends up in the elevator with Merv Griffin.
There's even funny stuff there. Like, I love the scene where he shows up to the little hooker corner and he just walks around and just starts judging everybody.
He goes into full murder mode.
Yeah.
And it's still comedic.
Like I told you, I love deranged Steve Martin. He plays deranged so well. I'm surprised he didn't do it more.
Is it weird that I feel bad for the hooker that thinks her voice is the problem?
Yeah.
It's like she was. I mean, I shouldn't feel bad because she barely escaped death.
Well, the fact he brought up death, and she's just like, really, I don't mind. She was all down for it. And her response when he leaves without killing her is just, "Aw, damn it."
She's upset that her voice may have spared her life.
Yeah. And it's funny. That's such a classic joke, you know, the attractive person with the annoying voice. But here, it's fun. I don't know if it's because it did it early or what, but that's a joke that could easily be overplayed. But in this one, it gets me.
All right, so
I think part of it too is the fact that he doesn't run away right away. He tries to tolerate it.
he surrenders to it.
Yeah, like there's buildup, and finally he's just like, nah.
Yeah, because she made him abandon one he was about to run off with.
Yeah. And it's funny that you talk about it being a slow burn, because there's some things that when they happen fast. Like his marriage happens in no time. Them moving to the country they're at, just fuck his hospital in America. He lives here now.
Oh yeah, speaking of him being in another country, the subtitle gag is pretty good.
Oh yeah, that whole police stop is pretty funny. Like I love the fact that just the simple act of her head like flopping over, she could still be passed out drunk, but the cop immediately jumps to murder.
Yeah, because that's the thing is, and you would think this would be a discredit to the movie, but in a way, it's kind of also a compliment.
Hmm.
Is these are like the police stopping him gag. The whole thing is a gag that you can really put in any movie.
Yeah.
It's like that you can definitely say about the Jerk. Like any of the gags in the Jerk could be in another comedy.
Mm-hmm. Like I also, going back to Steve Martin reactions, you've tried to wrap up his video like 5 times, and I just keep bringing you back.
No,
But when he does the drunk test, any other movie, the person would be outraged they had to go through all that. What's Steve Martin's response? Your guys' tests are really hard. Like he accepts it and just assumes it's a higher difficulty. Okay. And what do you think of the fact that the joke at the end, like it goes like he thought it would, but then we just cut to Kathleen Turner and she's just like, I never told him I was a compulsive eater.
Yeah. It was always just always like a weird joke to me. But I think that's before I was able to like appreciate the style. Like we talked about with the Jerk, where the jokes just are.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I forgot. We can't leave the Two Man with Two Brains without bringing up. I had forgotten this joke, but since I rewatched it last night, this might be one of my favorite jokes in the movie. I love the multiple pictures of the moment. And the fact that he presents her with a framed one, he's like, look, I got the moment framed.
Yeah, because it's one of those cases where when he walks in, he says, I wish this moment could last forever. And then it just dissolves into the next scene. You're like, you expect that to be a joke. And it's like, that's kind of weird that wouldn't be a joke. It seemed like it was set up to a joke because it dissolves into something else, but then it just pans over and we realize we're still in the moment. It's like, oh, okay, now, because just when he says that line, you're like, that has to be a setup. Like, what is the punchline?
And I also love the fact that Kathleen Turner's character is so evil and she's such a bitch, but she went along with the moment lasting forever.
Well, she may have not fallen asleep long after the film we first saw it.
She puts up with a lot of weirdness in the beginning.
Because there was never confirmation on how long the moment lasted.
Well, they came home in the middle of the day and then they were offered breakfast. Because I think Steve Martin asked if they got pictures of the moment, and then he's like, okay, breakfast. And then we see the pictures, like we pay off that joke with physical evidence. Oh man. I think both of these movies work in their own little universes. They're both still hilarious years later. I mean, The Jerk is what, 41 years old?
You can tell how funny we find it because we keep doing that Dr. Evil laugh where we laugh and then there's that afterward.
Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's any other jokes that we left out of either movie that are super funny. There's also like simple like a simple physical gag is his hat being stuck on his hard penis. It's such a simple joke.
And him knocking out the glass in the door.
Yeah. I love how for a majority of the movie, all this ridiculous shit that happens, Kathleen Turner plays it straight as an arrow.
Yeah, it's the perfect balance to what Martin's doing, because Martin's also playing it straight to an extent, but he also has to kind of elevate it.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that she just kind of had to do like she's not exactly doing the body heat character, but it's close enough that it's a perfect balance.
Mm-hmm. I think another physical joke that's really funny when he gets that drink from David Warner and he has the long ass straw and he's using it. There's so many little things. It's peppered with so many little jokes too. Both movies are. There's little jokes peppered throughout.
A lot of them are sight gags. Like if you were to like look away for a minute and just listen to the dialogue, you'd miss like 5 jokes in 1 minute.
Yeah, like the people in the observation room. It's the same costumes, different times that he's operating, but there's never any attention drawn to it.
That's almost an experiment I want to conduct.
Okay.
I want to play The Man with Two Brains and only listen to the audio and see how serious it sounds. Obviously, there's some things that will stick out, but I wonder how much of it will sound more serious without the visual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because then you would miss like the butler bringing in the new paper door is funny in itself, but the fact that he's like whistling a little tune and is happy about it helps. And then if I remember correctly, after he crashes through it, the butler just walks it back where he came from. Then another little joke with I love the butler character so much. I didn't realize how much I loved him. When Steve Martin comes in the middle of the night and he's like, "Can I wait?" The butler says yes, and he just closes the door in his face. Oh.
Is that the extent of it?
I think we've wrung it all dry.
I can't tell if it's the lighting or if your face is really red from laughing right now.
I think it's the lighting. But these are a couple of those movies. Yes, we have told a lot of the jokes that are in it. But you got to see the execution to make it pay off.
Yeah, because like we were saying, nobody can do Steve Martin.
Nah.
We can quote his jokes all we want, but it's not the same unless you hear him say it or see him do it.
Yeah. Especially with these two movies. I would say Steve Martin and Carl Reiner is probably his best team up, with him and Martin Short coming up pretty close behind him. Steve Martin tends to make magic around Martin Short.
Yeah, and once again, I command people not to downplay his collaboration with Frank Owens.
Yeah.
So is that what we're looking at?
So outside of these two movies, what would you say? Because I would assume the way you're talking about, are these your two favorite Carl Reiner movies?
Yeah, I would say so. There's one.
I was going to say, what would come in third?
Right here, the whole point is to talk about Carl Reiner. I'm going to draw a blank. I was pulling them out left and right at the beginning of this video, and now I'm blank.
We talked about his meta joke in The Jerk.
Oh, God, I'm going to kick myself after we stop recording. God damn it. Do you want to pull up his filmography really?
I can. What do you think of him as an actor in movies?
Yeah, because I think, weirdly enough, I think my introduction to him was the Ocean's movies, probably.
Probably.
I know with how long of a career he had, I know that's a weird place to come from. But apart from being introduced to these movies, like I probably would have not put it together back in the day that he in the Ocean's 11 movies directed The Jerk and Man with Two Brains. That was something I learned later in life.
Man, he's directed 21 things. He's acted in 102 things. I'd forgotten about this, like the perfectness of this. They did a Princess Bride TV series, and he plays the grandfather.
Of course.
All right. He hadn't directed anything since 1997, which was That Old Feeling. Then you had Fatal Instinct, Sibling Rivalry.
He did do Fatal Instinct.
What?
He did do Fatal Instinct, didn't he?
Yeah.
That's you know what that is, right?
No, I didn't.
That's the movie where obviously it's a mashup of Fatal Attraction and Basic Instinct.
Mm-hmm.
That's the movie with the joke I told you about that you laughed really hard at, where they're in court and the judge says we'll take a brief recess, and it cuts to them on a playground.
I found it. I found it. I can't believe we forgot he did this. Carl Reiner did Summer School.
Oh shit, that's right.
Yeah, because before Fatal Instinct, it was Sibling Rivalry. Then Burt Rigby, You're a Fool. Then Summer School, Summer Rental, All of Me, The Man with Two Brains, Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, The Jerk. That's 4 Martins in a row.
I
One
think
and Only, Oh God, Good Heavens. He directed some of the Dick Van Dyke Show. Where's Papa, the comic. Enter Laughing. That's pretty much his list.
once again, despite his long career, weirdly enough, I think there was one movie in particular I was trying to remember just then when I drew a blank.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure it was Summer School I was trying to think of.
There's a TV series called Shimmer and Shine, and it's like this little animated show. It looks like Bratz or something. In one episode, he plays Santa Claus. I forgot he was in an episode of House. Do you remember that? He's been in a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I know. Owen always referenced him when we did when he talked about his old TV career, and because Owen was really pumped when he did. Owen got to go to Conan one night, and Carl Reiner was the second guest, and that was like one of like Owen's defining life moments was seeing Carl Reiner in person.
In The Jerk, he's credited as Carl Reiner, the celebrity. Do you remember him being in Summer School?
I felt like I did, but I was trying to remember if he was or not.
He's Mr. Diradorian.
See, he's not the one that hires Mark Harmon, is he?
I'm not sure. He might be.
I feel like he might be at the beginning or something.
Maybe.
It's been too long since I've seen it. That's what the problem is.
That's a movie we're going to have to discuss at some point, too.
Yeah, there's got to be plenty of things to go with it. There has to be.
I would think so.
But in the meantime, is our next one going to be the one we discussed before, or do you want to explore our options?
Well, who else has passed away that we haven't addressed? I don't know that there's a couple Kelly Preston movies we could throw together, unfortunately.
Well, we'd be in that territory with the one we were talking about. It's just long after the person's dead.
Oh, okay.
Well, remember, there was somebody that you learned died when we talked about it. That person as well.
Who? I don't remember.
Brian Dennehy.
Oh, yeah.
I love how we're speaking cryptically about that, as if we haven't said all the clues of what it is.
Yeah, I know, right?
Because we just straight up said we were doing this one.
Yeah.
So yes, we were kicking around Tommy Boy and Black Sheep as the next one.
Yeah.
There's also a serious one.
We've been in comedy for a while. I
Yeah,
mean, Comedyland's fun.
there's a serious one that I'd be really interested to do with you for many reasons,
Hmm.
but I feel like you wouldn't be interested because it's one that it would take a lot more effort to discuss than comedies.
Which is what?
To we'll talk about this when we're done recording. I don't want to start any
Okay.
controversies about my opinions of certain movies that may change if I watch them in preparation for a video like this, and maybe I'll be more on the positive side of these movies. But they're two very, very, very beloved movies that I have never really taken to.
Like The Replacements all over again.
Yeah, but these are considered two of the best movies ever made by a lot of people.
Oh, man.
And they're movies I think you like pretty well. So you're safe. I'm the one that has to, because I've never really had to explain what it is I have a hard time taking to about these movies, and I would have to do that on camera, probably being watched by people that think these movies are the Holy Grail. That's a
Okay,
lot of
just spitballing here. Do either one of these movies involve Harrison Ford or Gene Hackman?
no.
Oh, man.
One of them involves an actor we talked about in one of the movies just now.
Mark Harmon?
No.
Oh,
James Cromwell.
Babe?
No, I'd love to talk about Babe. I wouldn't be
Oh,
afraid to talk about Babe.
LA Confidential.
Maybe.
What were you thinking of doing it with, hypothetically?
Think Polanski.
Chinatown.
How weird is it? I'm so afraid to say my opinion of this movie, and it's a Polanski movie, and it's not for that reason. That tells you how afraid I am to talk about this movie.
I love that it actually puts fear in you to talk about it. And not to mention you're afraid of talking about LA Confidential, but not for the reason that you would think.
those, those two movies.
There's some bad juju around those movies.
Those two movies have some scary ass people involved.
Yeah, there's a pretty thin line there.
Would you have interest in partaking in Chinatown versus LA Confidential?
Man, I don't know.
Somebody asked me a long time ago to do LA Confidential, and I panicked.
You panicked?
I was like, well, I'd probably do it with Chinatown, but
Man, I don't mind Chinatown, but man, it's one of those movies I got to be in the mood to watch.
But I feel like now that I watch things from a much more analytical perspective, having started doing this, if I will see Chinatown LA Confidential differently now, because I've rewatched them a number of times, and I just can't get to that sweet spot with them.
And I don't know that you will.
Well, the people will know what we decided on just by what the next video is when it appears.
I just love the fact that right now it's up in the air, literally. It's either going to be Chinatown versus LA Confidential or Tommy Boy versus Black Sheep.
It's like, well, do we take the hard road or the really easy road? You'll find out soon.
That's like do we discuss the film career of Marlon Brando or Danny McBride? Like, that's what we're looking at here pretty much. No disrespect to Danny McBride. That was just the first person I thought of.
Or Farley and Spade, for that matter, depending on how you feel about which group of people there.
Which I got that analogy backwards because you like Brando. You're kind of on the fence about Danny McBride.
Yeah. Well,
although you did say that you loved him in Pineapple Express.
Yeah. All right. The rest of this conversation should probably happen off camera, so we don't veer off too much on the jerk man with your brains video.
I know we started this video as a tribute to Carl Reiner, and I think we spent 10 minutes talking about Carl Reiner.
This is basically what happens during the awards videos when we do our predictions, but then we just start talking to the chat and just completely get off on a whole new thing. which is
No, I mean, we did barely mention Carl Reiner by name, but that's just because his jokes spoke for themselves. Like we didn't talk about the man. We talked about his work, and his work was great.
And we've alluded to the fact that we would love to talk about summer school. So.
Yeah, there's more of his work we'd like to discuss.
All right, let's end this before we get too out of control. But whatever the next video is,
You mean out of control? You mean out of control, like Steve Martin running at a wall and backflipping?
or anything else that happens in either one of these movies.
What a great fucking visual.
All right. So if you don't have anything else to add, or you do have things to add, but we should wrap up anyway.
I think we could wrap it up here.
All right. So until whatever the next thing is, I think we're done here.
Yeah.